Drive Time on BCFM 93.2.
Now, Martin Summers, how would you tell the real story in 4 TV episodes of the First World War, Martin? Let's start by looking at some of the causes. Imperialism.
Imperialism. Well, what is imperialism? Often people think of imperialism, they talk about Lenin's theory of imperialism, but most people don't realise that Lenin's theory of imperialism was actually based upon a theory by a liberal thinker in Britain called E.A. Hobson. He was the one that said that who developed the theory of imperialism, which Lenin eventually copied. And basically he was saying that competition between big, imperialist countries like Britain and France, for example, and Germany, ultimately leads to war because they're fighting over markets, they're fighting over access to resources, and that this basically leads to war. And this was a theory developed before the First World War by a liberal thinker based here in Britain, but actually taken up by Lenin, and of course who made it famous because he was the leader of the Bolshevik Revolution.
What about the effect that it has on the domestic population? Because obviously for example, you look at both of the wars, what it did is it solved problems at home, didn't it? Domestic problems. I mean, for example, in the 1930s, there was a massive unemployed movement. All these people were then, the empire could then say to all these people, right, you've got to now join the army and go off and fight.
Well, I mean, it's from Henry V, isn't it, Shakespeare, to giddy simple minds with foreign quarrels. When you've got social tensions at home, you've got problems with trying to keep everybody in line, and in Britain before the First World War there were big social tensions. You got the Irish independence movement, you got the syndicalist trade unionism, pushing for higher wages and workers' control of industry, and you'd also got the suffragettes demanding votes for women, all of whom were prepared to use extra parliamentary tactics to get their goals. So Britain was actually on the verge of revolution in 1914, but in actual fact the war squashed all of that for the time being, although of course these things always come back.
Okay, what about the Balkan conflict, national chauvinism?
Well, I mean, we saw this in the 1990s when I was an aid worker over there. The Balkans is the place where people go to settle their scores. So you've got all of these different ethnic groups intermingled, and they've all got protectors, and my dad's bigger than your dad scenario begins to develop. So you get Croatia backed by Germany and America taking on Serbia backed by Russia, etc. And the Balkans was the flashpoint for the First World War because all of the tensions between the big powers were played out there, and we've got plenty of places like the Balkans dotted around the world now. I mean, Ukraine is now performing the same kind of role potentially in relation to World War III and Syria as the Balkans played in the 1900s. But of course, the Balkans is still a very serious source of tension in world politics.
And to what extent was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand actually really the cause of World War One, and who was the guy?
Well, Archduke Ferdinand was the heir to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he was assassinated by a Serbian extremists who were actually being helped by the Serbian government, the royalist government of Serbia. Now, they claimed that they were not helping him, that it was it was a deniable terrorist group. But the Austrian government took the view that the Serbian government were definitely responsible for the assassination. The Serbs denied it, but I think historical evidence suggests that they did have some hand in it. And then the Austrians then used that as an excuse to say to the Serbs, right, we're going to attack you because you've killed our Archduke Ferdinand. And of course, British people have got to remember that the Austrians were responding to the Serbs assassinating their leader. And then, of course, we went to war to protect Serbia. So, were we on the right side or the wrong side?
Okay, fascinating. Do you think it really was the cause? I mean,
well, that was the proximate cause. That was the proximate cause. Every just as World War II, the proximate cause was invasion of Poland. But of course, the Japanese had already invaded China several years previously, and if there had been a decision to fight over Czechoslovakia, then it would have been the invasion of Czechoslovakia that caused World War II. So the proximate cause could vary, because the real tension is the underlying tension between the power structures in Germany, Britain, Russia, etc.
Now, the next point in Paul Mason's sketch, because Paul Mason, the Channel 4 news chap, used to be a BBC Newsnight economics guy, sketched out some ideas around a programme to do with the real First World War. The next point is the arms race and technology.
Yeah, I mean, you had an arms race, particularly around battleships between Britain and Germany. Germany basically Britain had used its navy to dominate, the extra European world. The Germans didn't have any colonies. And of course, what actually happened in the war is that the British blockaded Germany, therefore creating shortages and hunger inside Germany. The Germans then retaliate by the U-boat campaign against Britain's supply lines in the Atlantic. But of course, both sides started to build up their battleships, and as one side built up its battleships, the other side felt that it had to build up its battleships, and so an arms race ensued, similar to the one between the Soviet Union and the US in the Cold War period.
Okay, what about organised, monopolised economies?
Well, this is a key one, because what begins to happen, capitalism, the final stage of imperialism, as Lenin called it, is early capitalism has got lots and lots of small entrepreneurs rushing around, creating people like Wedgwood and Arkwright and so on. But eventually, capitalism settles down to become a stable system, which involves investment in research and development, long-term planning, big organisations with an internal hierarchy. And the Germans in particular were very good at making new scientific discoveries into serviceable business ideas. And they were systematic about it. Now, of course, what they're doing by doing that, and the US were doing the same thing, was taking the British Empire's markets. And ultimately that leads to tension, because that means that you're going to get something and we're not going to get it. And the tension, those kind of tensions are still palpable in the world today.
Society's in denial, the Edwardian Belle Epoque and social liberalism.
Well, there was a general view, and I think the First World War blew it out of the water, that human society was on an improving arc. And that was right across the spectrum. Everybody believed this. The liberals believed it, that free trade would improve human society. Conservatives believed that if everybody just stuck to their traditional values, that the society would improve. And the communists even believed, and the Marxists even believed, that society was improving, possibly through conflict and war, but in any case improving. I think, standing as we do in the 21st century, in 2014, it's quite obvious that there's not necessary that society should improve. And if you look at the long spread of human history, with the collapse of civilizations like ancient Egypt and so on, in actual fact, things can go backwards just as easily as they can go forwards.
Well, it's almost like social inequalities there. Also, control of technology is also in a very few hands. Right, labour movements, anarchism and socialism.
Well, of course, before the First World War, the socialist movement had developed very, very strongly across Europe, and of course, even in the US, you had the Industrial Workers of the World, who were an internationalist movement, and the Second International, which was founded in the 19th century, basically had all of it still exists. I mean, the Labour Party, of which I'm a member, is still part of the Socialist International. They had a policy that if the ruling classes of Germany, Britain and whoever else decided to have a war, then there would be a general strike across Europe which would stop that war from happening. And in the run-up to war, that all fell apart. Jean Jaurès, who is the head of the French Socialist Party, was assassinated by a right-wing fanatic. And the trade unions in Germany, France and elsewhere were unable, because everybody believed that they were under attack. And so the policy of trying to call a general strike to stop the war just fell apart. In Germany, where the labour movement was strongest, they were told, look, the Russians are invading us, and if we don't defend the fatherland, we're going to have the Tsar running things around here. So this is the thing that people in Britain don't quite grasp. Why would the German socialists, the German socialists didn't really support the war, but why would the German working class initially support the war? Because they thought they were being invaded by Russia, who was our ally.
Okay. Yeah? Finally tonight, the outbreak and the race to the sea, Tannenberg. What was Tannenberg?
Well, Tannenberg was when the Russian army tried to invade Germany, and the Germans, who were basically fighting on two fronts, were able to surround and destroy them at the Battle of Tannenberg, which of course put Russia onto the slippery slope towards revolution. And it's often forgotten in the West that our major ally in the war was Tsarist Russia, and ordinary people in Germany felt Tsarist Russia was more of a threat than anything else.
OK, fascinating, Martin. Over the next few weeks, we'll be looking also, at Paul Mason's behest, at the slaughter, the revolutions and the aftermath of the First World War. But bringing us right back up to date, in a nutshell, Ukraine, Martin.
Well, Ukraine I've been watching with great concern what's been going on this week. There's a real potential here for a Yugoslavia-style situation, because Ukraine isn't really one whole country. You've got two major groups: the Ukrainian-speaking people in the West who look to Europe, and the Russian-speaking people in the East who look to Moscow. And that could be Bosnia writ large.
But what about the major players on both sides?
Well, the players on both sides, I mean, we're talking...
Is it remote from Ukraine, do you think?
No, it's not. I mean, in actual fact, coming back to the First World War, what you've got is exactly the kind of geopolitical tensions that led to the First World War are now being expressed in Ukraine and elsewhere, in Syria, for example.